Welcome, y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I am really excited to be here. I am really thrilled to introduce you to this guest on this Featured Voices episode. If you are new to the podcast, make sure that right now you go hit subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Or you can always stream this and listen on your favorite podcasting platforms. We're on Apple, we're on Audible, we're on Prime, we're on Spotify, we're on all the stuff. So go hit subscribe or follow, whatever the mechanism is, if you find value. I'm so glad you're here today, and I'm also glad that you showed up for you. Remember that a lot of our episodes are shorter in length, but once a month, we have a longer extended episode just like this one, where we are featuring a featured voice. They come from a number of sectors. They are people who have served in various roles throughout their careers, and they are people often who I know personally, and I know that they have a story to tell that will impact, hopefully, some of our listeners in a powerful way. One final thing before I actually introduce our guest at the Cultural Capacity virtual table today is to make sure that you go to the show notes. In any show, we will always have a section that is called resources, and we want you to take advantage of and explore those resources. There is one link that is always an option for you, even if it's only $5 a month. I get the honor of serving on the board of an incredible nonprofit called Educate Me Foundation, and that link will always be there. Feel free to contribute to any initiatives that you feel led to and check out what we're all about. We are working to increase the teacher pipeline, specifically with teachers and principals of color. So if you want to support that initiative or figure out the other ways you can monetarily give, please click that link. Okay, I think that is all I have. Again, remember, you can listen to these, but we do also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We now also have a new playlist, which Kara Gonzalez Howard will be hosting these episodes once a month here as part of the Cultural Capacity Podcast called Workplace Wellness. So if that's also your jam, and you want to know strategies for how you and or your teams that you work with can better infuse some wellness strategies into the workplace, you will definitely want to check out those episodes. All right, I'm done yakking, and I'm excited to introduce our guest. Her name is Jamelle Godlewski. She's not only served in an array of roles connected to the K-12 education sector, she's done a variety of things where she has actually founded and successfully carried out the vision of different nonprofit organizations. She is a mother, a dog mom, and also a mother of a daughter who is getting ready to go to college. And one thing I like to do before guests introduce whatever pieces they want to share about themselves before we dive into conversation is I like to give each guest their flowers. I know that some people, this makes them a little uncomfortable, but I think it's a very good process for people to also hear just some things that maybe you don't always notice, or you don't know if people notice about you. So I want to start with two things about you, Jamelle. One of the things that always strikes me about you as a leader is that you are unapologetic about your story, but also your radical vulnerability. And when I say that, and I know she'll share parts more of her story today, but Jamelle actually has a podcast of her own as well. And she has been very transparent about her journey of recovering as an alcoholic, like all of the things, right? And so anybody, especially if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I struggle with this form of addiction. And addictions can be anything from sugar to nicotine to food to right? We all have our vices as humans. And I just really admire that about you, because there aren't a whole lot of people out there that are willing to really put it all out there when you've had a struggle with a substance. And so that is something I want to give you flowers about. I also want to tell you that I really think that you're a phenomenal mother, and I see all the ways that you inspire and share about your daughter. And that's what I've got right now on my heart. So I wanted to kick off with that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you. And in the next few minutes, if you could just introduce yourself your way, the Jamelle way, and what you'd like people to know about you. So give us a little context about who is Jamelle, and we're going to get dive into some questions here.
Right. Well, first you almost made me cry.
Oh,
And
well,
I
we do that sometimes here.
Well, probably more about my daughter because single mom, raised her, gone through mental health issues, and I go to therapy to like learn how to deal with her leaving. So like, yeah,
Good
like
for you. Yes.
yeah, that's what. Yeah, how do I lose my daughter? She's going to college. So I'm always wondering. I think we live in a culture where like, what do you do and who are you? And you always feel like you have to have a title. And I'm Jamelle. I'm like one name artist, kind of like Cher and Madonna, but that sounds really bad.
That's what I say too. I'm like, I'm just Justine, like Beyonce.
So the other day when I was thinking, I do a lot of reflecting, and I'm like, gosh, what am I? And I thought, my number one goal is to make an impact in life, like on the world, in the community, with everybody I run into. So I think on my social media, I call myself a kingdom influencer, and a leader. I just want to make impact. And sometimes I get paid to do that, and sometimes I don't. And I'm okay, either way.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you actually do know about some of my story, but some of it makes a really big difference. So I was adopted from birth. And so neither one of my parents are my biological parents. My brother is not a biological brother. That played all of those things. How I was raised played a huge role in who I am today. Professionally, when I graduated from high school, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher and a basketball coach. And so I pursued that. And I spent my education career is very diverse. So 3 years in Northern Indiana at two different schools that are completely opposite, but smaller. Long story short, I ended up in Southern New Mexico at a high school that had almost 3,000 students. And so coming from LaGrange, Indiana, there was more people in the building than there was in my whole town.
In Las Cruces.
Yes. And that changed my life. And we can go into like why that had such a huge impact on me personally and definitely professionally. So I spent 5 years out there. The last 2 or 3 years, I was trying to remember today. But I was part of a team of teachers, and then I was the leader where we developed alternative program. It was the school within a school model. So this would have been like 2001-ish, 2002-ish, somewhere in there.
Kind of at the dawn of the heavier school reform era.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you're in education, or if you're watching or listening and you're not in K-12 education in the United States, there was kind of an uprising. We had something called No Child Left Behind for a while under George Bush. And now we're under ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act, right? These are different accountability systems for K-12 systems. So if you're not in the education world, just know that she's talking about something that was a model for a different way of doing school. And this was kind of at the peak of the late 90s and early 2000s, and going into Obama's administration under Arne Duncan as well, State Secretary of Education for our country. He had a lot of reform efforts going. So go on. Sorry. So, I do sometimes get context because we have listeners from all over the world and all that kind of stuff. Go on. Sorry.
That time frame, not just working with the population I was working with, but working with the administrator I was working with. I'm almost going to cry thinking about it. It completely changed my life. And that was like, this is, how do I say this? It sounds horrible, maybe not. This is what education was supposed to be. And so we developed a program. So I remind you, I'm at a school of 3,000 students. We developed a program and targeted I don't want to use the word worst, the lowest most
performing
risk 100 students. Those were the kids that we went after. It was incredible.
Okay.
And I believed that for 3 years. And then I made the decision to move back to Indiana because of my parents. I knew I was going to have to take care of them. And
Okay.
then I spent 3 years at Elkhart Central. So again, another diverse, dynamic.
It would have been a very growing population at that time. And I grew up. So again, Jamelle and I's paths crossed after, like, we were in similar circles because myself, and if you all watch this channel, you know, my sister is part of our team. I forgot to even say that Jamelle is actually part of Team Educator Aid too. And part of our network of consultants that serve organizations and schools.
Right.
So, but all this to say, we actually crossed paths with new
Right.
people
Like, I
that,
can't
like,
believe we physically didn't cross paths is the crazy thing.
we crossed paths in our careers at different points, but I grew up in Elkhart, Indiana. So where she's
Right.
speaking about geographically, if you're outside of the United States, it's in the Midwest, which is the center of the country, kind of the crossroads of America as it's known. And we grew up about 2 hours east of Chicago. So if you know Chicago and where that's at, that might help you place it. But actually, when my father's family migrated from Chicago, he was born in Chicago. We were some of the first Latino family in Elkhart County. But then to your point, to give people context, by the time you would have been over there serving, a lot of the population had shifted. So you had a wide array of all types, similar to my family, of all types of cultures in schools that historically were predominantly either white and or black.
Right. So my time in New Mexico prepared me, okay? And almost in the way of, like, I knew better, like I knew more than they really, than what some people want you to know as a teacher.
Okay.
So I knew I was used to working with Hispanics and lower income. I loved that, actually. I loved to work with the population that nobody else wanted to work with. And so when I went to Elkhart Central, I was just like, this sounds horrible. What is going on here? And we are not serving these populations at all. And shockingly, I'm a rule breaker. I feel like it's a positive thing. But I knew my second year there that I could not be in public education, at least in Indiana, anymore. So I created a way to, like, I'm leaving next year.
What were you noticing? Let me ask this question just again, so subscribers have an idea of sometimes the plight of teachers and what you say, and we'll keep it more global too, so it's not as like zoned in, because I will say this too, working across the country and also having access to systems outside of the United States as well. It's a phenomenon that I see happen a lot in the United States because our public education system was never designed for all students. It served a very specific purpose, actually, even when standardized testing was introduced in the 20s, 30s, 40s, it was actually for drafting purposes for the military. And so those same practices are still here about 100 years later. Schools were highly segregated. They still are in a lot of ways because of our zip code systems, our tax code system, all these things that were very intentional in a lot of ways in our country structure. But when you say that a school is not open, because again, this happens often where you see a demographic shift,
Right.
don't necessarily have the team of principals or teachers or that school district. Those people don't necessarily change. They're still the same people in place, but something happens, like, and I see this a lot specifically in Indiana. We're the second fastest growing Spanish speaking populace in the country, and we have been as far as like English learners. And so when that happens, I've seen many schools then, and legitimately, they just literally don't have access to resources or the knowledge. So when you talk about, oh, I knew I had to get out of public education, what did that mean for you? Why? What were, at that time, what were you seeing happen at that time that you're like, oh, I can't, no, I'm not going to be able to serve the way I want to?
the New Mexico, Indiana thing in context. Now, I still, as you well know, I am an advocate and I love public schools. I love reform. I love to we should be.
She's a disruptor, everyone.
I'm a disruptor. So we moved out in New Mexico. I'm going to give a shout out. I'm sure he'll never hear it, but I just want to say his name. Mark Hartshorn is my principal. And when he decided to start this program, he allowed the teachers to form teams.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you form your own team. So we formed our own team of teachers. We had to have one from each discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, I'm going to give you whatever. We start school at 8, we end school at 3. You can use those hours however you want. You want to have English for a half hour and math for an hour? Great. But you want to switch it up the next day? Great. You want to do whatever. It was going to be project-based learning, but a little bit different. And so kids had to master some basic skills. Mm-hmm. And the project became we want to do the project.
Yeah.
And he was like, you do whatever it takes to reach these kids. Because if they don't think that you love them and you care about them, we'll never reach them. He goes, don't worry about test scores, because once these kids know that you're on their side, test scores will go up. Hmm. So he threw everything that everybody cared about out the window, and he empowered us.
Yeah.
And he allowed us to do all the discipline within house. He's like, if you need me, you know where to find me. So it was not uncommon that kids would we had kids that it was nothing to miss 50 to 80 days of school a year. Yeah. Nothing.
Yeah.
Well, we would just so we team taught. And so I know you're not supposed to do these things. I would tell the teacher, we would work together as a team and say, okay, we're going to put all 2 classrooms together. Mm-hmm. And maybe whatever, that teacher created something that they could do, whatever. And we would actually go get kids. We would go to the ditch where they're smoking pot, bring them to school. They would purposely get thrown in detention. We'd go get them out of detention. We'd go to their house and bring them to school. Mm-hmm. We were like, no, we love you. We want you in our room.
Yeah.
It was amazing, the results, as you can imagine. Right. The result, all those, parents don't care. Parents do care.
Yeah.
And we found parents, by the end of the year, they were all coming to the open houses and whatever.
It's like the quote. It's the quote we all hear. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
We did theme-based projects, and we put the curriculum. We didn't pay any attention to standards and benchmarks. I know we're not supposed to say that, but we taught kids. And we took a group of, these are the most at-risk kids. So we had one of our projects once it was the 100-year anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. So every discipline did something in regards to that. All right. And so at the end of it, the culmination was a field trip to Holloman Air Force Base. Holloman Air Force Base is the home of the stealth fighter.
Nice.
So these are the most at-risk kids. So as we pull up, my first thing is, kids, you really can't joke about guns here. This is, right. And when we got there, these kids got to do what no other human being that visits Holloman gets to do. They actually got to walk underneath the stealth.
Wow.
Because it's all classified information, but just don't touch. But these, you empower, you believe and empower. So when I came here, right before I left New Mexico, my principal was always about, you want training, you want whatever, we're taking, you're going to it.
Yeah.
And I did some training on education, achievement, the achievement gap. Mm-hmm. And before I went into team teaching, one period I taught pre-algebra, and the next period I taught honors trig. Are you ready? Pre-algebra. Every minority student was in pre-algebra. Every kid that was below a certain socioeconomic standard, right? Pre-algebra. Next period, 5 minutes later, it's honors trig. Can you guess what color those kids were? Right? Can you guess their socioeconomic status? Mm-hmm. And so before I left, on my resignation letter, I wrote a mini essay, we'll say, and sent it to every school board member to say, this is what we're doing. Like, this is the system, the system. So when I was armed when I came back to Indiana. And then I saw it in action again. You know, I saw the races, the diversity where they didn't get along. Like, I can't, like, what do we mean we're gonna? I mean, I had gang fights out there, like real gang fights. I remember a Hispanic girl one day, she asked me to take her home and I broke all the rules. And I'm like, okay, well, why didn't you ride the bus? Well, because these girls were going to jump me if I rode the bus and blah, blah, blah. So I took her home and she's like, takes me down an alley. And I'm like, well, why aren't we going to the front of your house? So she was like, Miss, you don't want people to see your car. So I kind of always took those chances. But what I found was like, we just weren't meeting. We were checking boxes. If kids didn't pass, I think then it was the I-step probably. I don't think we were at ECA
You're
yet.
pushing kids through, basically. Like,
right.
They
so
did or didn't do this. It wasn't about Daniel.
No,
this is a little, like, analogy. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about the data. And when students become just a number, students become just a number for the bottom line, one thing I want listeners to understand too, there's two really quick things. So really quick teaching point. And I do this on a lot of episodes too, Jamelle. Please don't take any offense or anything. And I'm part Puerto Rican también. So there's a difference. So she's using the term Hispanic. In our American public education system, students are coded as Hispanic. And I was always growing up just like my siblings. If you come from a heritage or a home where Spanish is spoken. So the descriptor Hispanic is for people who come from a Spanish speaking country of origin. So that also includes Spain and other places, right? But when it comes to the term Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, all the different varieties we have now, those are actually descriptors of your ethnicity and your countries of origin. And there's a little bit of difference there in nuance. So one is based on language, one is based on your country of origin, essentially. So just putting that out there for subscribers to know the difference of the terms. The second thing I want to point out is, as Jamelle is stating, a lot of times what happens, it's not that the teachers you work with are so mean or so bad or so terrible to kids, or they don't believe in them. It's not that principals and superintendents don't want the best for all students. That is usually not the case. Now, there are times I've encountered, and there are still clients that our team works with, where there are many underlying beliefs that come out. But that is why when you facilitate conversations and you push for people to be really vulnerable together, we can't accept those things about ourselves, or maybe some harmful beliefs that we have, until we process those things together and actually own them and say, okay, I accept, I made a mistake. I said this, or, oh, I didn't know I was thinking that way about this type of student, right? And you don't stay there and beat yourself up. You own it, you learn from it, and you progress. One of the things that we don't do well yet in our public education system, and why we really need to reimagine how we're doing this, is there's two things that Jamelle denoted. New Mexico worked really well because teachers had autonomy and they were trusted to do what they needed to do. And they also believed in the students and had relationship with them. Now, when you then have the pressures of a system who magically, by the 80s, the DOE didn't become a bureau in the United States, the Department of Education, until the 80s. And they applied concepts of capitalism, which is our society here. And the concepts of capitalism are bottom line numbers and what you produce. So what we end up doing then is fixating on, well, did they pass the test or didn't they pass the test? Did they master the skill or didn't they master the skill? Instead of looking at all the comprehensive holistic attributes of what it means to develop healthy, well-adjusted, thriving, empowered young people who are going to be the next to lead our society and our world. And so then that is why I think, especially if you look at the past 20 years, we've just had this ongoing deterioration of, people not wanting to enter the field, people not feeling appreciated and leaving the field. And so to bring that full circle, what did you take away from that drove you to then found your nonprofit?
Right. That's exactly what it was. And the interesting thing is, when I left New Mexico, that administrator had left the last year I was there. He went to Colorado and got hired specifically to do the same thing. The next administrator had different beliefs, and that program stopped after 3 years.
Yeah.
There's no program left anymore for that now. So there's so much leadership driven. So when I came back, and that's mixing with, because I haven't, my own, like, I had mental health struggles. And so in the midst of this, that holistic, you brought up the word holistic, I had in college, so this is 30 plus years ago, 30 years ago, I had a college professor who was my advisor. So I have a degree in math. That was what my bachelor's degree was. And he told me, this has never left me, Jamelle, you don't teach math, you teach students.
Yeah.
So that's always been a factor, is like, okay, you're right, the kid didn't check the box and master it. Why? What's going on? Was it the way I taught it?
Yeah.
Right.
Did I teach it the way that they learned? Do I even know how they learned? Did I actually assess it the way that I taught it? All those things that we often aren't trained to take ownership.
That drove me towards so when I left public education, then I went into faith-based alternative school because I thought that was the way to go, right? And campus coordinator, that did not turn out the way I thought it was, because it doesn't matter if the education system has just a lot of boxes.
Yeah. There's a lot of red tape.
There's still that holistic approach of like, discipline is not a bad thing. I was just talking to someone yesterday in the school system, and I said, we look at, it's changing our paradigm, right? It's like, we look at discipline as a negative instead of like, okay, this is the consequences for, like, this is where my upbringing was. There's consequences to your behavior and there's consequences to your choices. That does not mean you're a bad person.
That's right.
It doesn't mean I don't love you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I don't care about you. It doesn't mean that I'm throwing you away. I'm saying that there's consequences and you're going to have to face these consequences, but I'm going to walk through these consequences and this challenge with you. And we're going to change the paradigm thinking from the challenge is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to change. It's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity. It's all about like a mind shift. And so when I got completely out of education, I literally had no idea what to do. And I actually stayed away from, when I started my nonprofit in 2011, I actually purposely stayed away from youth and education and all that because I had just been I'd burned out, right? I just anything to do with it, whether it be in ministry or whether it be secular, it didn't even matter.
Right.
But I had a couple people that were always like, Jamelle, that's what you're supposed to be doing. No, I'm not going to listen to you. And then God kind of made it happen. And that fire, that passion is still there. So it doesn't matter what I do, like, I don't care if it's working. Like I just sold my house, moving into a different house, literally 500 feet. So I called 3 teenagers up on Tuesday, 2 teenage boys, because I'm not moving stuff up from my basement. Are you kidding me? Hey, come over to my house. You're going to help me move stuff. It's relationship. I'm taking you out for ice cream. I don't pay anybody, and so nothing's changed. It's just I do it in different ways other than in the classroom.
You're still a vessel. You're still a vessel to serve youth.
Yeah.
It just might be wrapped up differently.
It is. looks different, and there's not a title for it. There's not a, I just was trying to talk to someone the other day of like, well, what do you do? I'm like, well, it depends on the day. Like, it depends on and well, do you get paid for this? Well, I don't know. Like, sometimes the check comes in and sometimes it doesn't. Yes, I sign some contracts,
Right.
but I do what I believe God wants me to do in whatever way I believe is the right way.
It's beautiful.
But it doesn't fit the box, right? And my heart is still education. My heart is still, because education is not a building, just like church is not a building.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back, there's this interesting through line and everything that you're saying. And it seems like in your life path a little bit of that, not getting caught up on the what, but looking at why and how and who. And it's very easy. I used to tell my teachers actually the same thing. Are we teaching students or are we teaching curriculum? What's your priority today? And
Right.
so it was the same, right? Same mentality, that you can't get lost. Structures and processes, systems, they can be fabulous. And we need to be tracking, are we making an impact? Are we actually helping kids? Of course, we need to be tracking those metrics in the right ways. But when we do those things as an arbitrary to try to serve whatever entity is asking for a report or whatever, it can become convoluted really fast. And then you kind of lose that sense of purpose. And it does lead to the burnout and the kind of, I have a colleague, he always says it's kind of like believing out too, because you go, I don't believe in this system. But then also taking that ownership like you have to go, yeah, but it's not the youth work that is the problem for me. It's how do I believe in the work I'm doing still, but I need to maybe do it in a different environment and in a different structure. So when you think about that and just how you're so drawn to and very active in your community with helping youth specifically, I'm going to come back to frequently asked questions you get, but I want to go to our segment about inner child. And any guests we have here for Featured Voices episodes, we ask this question, and part of it is it's very important to my story and also a lot of my own healing journey in this life. But I want to know a little bit about, I'm going to ask a different question before we go into a key principles question of little Jamelle. But I'm intrigued because I do think that an overlooked population that can sometimes battle a sense of identity and belonging are kids who are adopted. And then you add layers, like often in the United States, you might have Black or brown kids who are adopted by white parents. You might have, in your situation, where you have white parents adopting a white person, but they might be coming from totally different wiring, totally different backgrounds genetically. And you may have certain predispositions that your parents had no idea, that this is just part of who Jamelle is. So can we hear, are you willing to share a little bit just about your upbringing and childhood and how that came about? Because I do think that's such a privilege to get to hear these stories. I have my 4 cousins I'm closest to are all adopted, and I'm always just in admiration of how they move in the world, because I do think it's just something that doesn't often get talked about mainstream. I don't see a lot of talk about it, but it's a very common thing.
Right. So yeah, shockingly, I found out more people that I grew up with are adopted than what I ever knew. And I found this all out in my 40s and late 40s.
Right.
So my brother and I we were both adopted from birth. We don't know, back in the 70s, you didn't have these conversations with your parents, but I remember never questioning it. Like I know I was adopted from birth. I think maybe I found out when I was 4 or 5, never questioned it. I had a great life. I grew up on a farm. I don't want to, how do I say this? We use the term dysfunctional. I grew up in a very functional home, very functional home.
A healthy, regulated home. Okay.
Yeah. community, neighborhood, school, everything. So I never questioned anything about it. And so I have a minor in psychology, and that was done purposely because, like, when I was in middle school, I grew up in church, but my parents were not religious. Like, we went to Sunday school and whatever, but no Bible thumping, that kind of thing. When we got to become teenager, it was like, okay, it's your choice whether you go or not, you know.
Beautiful.
But I did have a grandma that was a Bible thumper on my mom's side. So I would find out which cousins are going to hell.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It plays a role because as the oldest cousin's going to hell, I was second to the youngest. So there was this oldest cousin's going to hell because she got pregnant in high school.
Okay. So like a very old.
Oh yeah. Next one's going to hell because of whatever. Now, I didn't realize at the time what that was doing in my mom's mind, because my mom grew up with that, and how that was in my life until, you know, later on. So when I remember in middle school, starting having like, not feeling like I was good enough, but there was no reason for me to not feel that way because I was extremely successful and I never had parents that put like a pressure on me. But I wasn't going to tell anybody. We didn't talk about depression and anxiety. You know, that was just, you just didn't do it. And so when I got to high school, there comes a point that you have to figure out a way to cope. And that was when, like, I turned to alcohol. Partying was like a great coping skill because I could live two different lives. And so I did live two different lives. But at some point, everything comes crashing down. And so multiple times in my high school career, everything came crashing down.
And you were also, I want listeners to understand this because I do know this about you. You were a very, not only like a successful academic student, very smart, very successful, but you had like a thriving athletic career going.
Oh yeah, I was like captain of every sport.
I'm sharing this because I know this about your story, but meanwhile, you're out there getting lit and drinking and getting drunk like the night before big games and stuff.
Yeah. And knowing it's wrong. I believe every human being has something in them, right? That you know.
Your internal compass.
Right. The mental health thing, I cannot live with the way I'm feeling. I am thinking. I will do anything it takes to not think and feel this way, even if I know it's wrong, even if I know I could go to jail, even if I know my mom's going to kill me, even if I know it could kill me.
That's how much I will feel better.
Yeah, that's what mental health, that's the problem, right? Yeah. And so this was the turning point in the adoption world, is I had a point where my drunkenness and my mental health all exploded. And I was in my room and my mom, I was in the second floor, my room was upstairs, and my mom, is my junior year in high school, my mom was downstairs talking to one of my basketball coaches, who's the guidance counselor at Lakeland, Rachel. She was like my big sister. Yeah, Rachel. And I remember my mom telling Rachel, Jamelle's biological mom was a heroin addict.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so I'm upstairs, and this is what my 17-year-old brain heard. I am meant to be a loser. This is what my life is going to be like. Like, it's in me, it's genetic. I'm going to be a loser. I'm going to be a failure. There's no other option in life. Now, I didn't tell anybody that. And everybody around me did the right thing. They intervened. They got me into therapy. I even had friends intervene on my life. That's what a real friend does, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, despite the fact that
even though it's hard.
Right. So my senior year, the crashing down ended up, my parents put me in rehab. And I had already had a career-ending basketball injury, knee injury that I lost all my athletics, which that was another mental health blow. And the cycle, it just completely spun out of control. One of the things when I talk to people about mental health is, we think that therapy or rehab or whatever, like, that's going to cure people. No, there is no cure. But did it help? Well, this is what I say. I'm alive today. And I have friends that are not alive today.
Yeah.
So did it help? I'm alive.
Yeah.
I learned new coping skills each time. Now, my sophomore year of college, I drove myself to rehab. So I knew at that point, like, and in the midst of that, there was this battle, right? Of like knowing things about my adoption. That's going on in my mind, my heart, the abandonment issues.
Yeah.
Then there is this, my coping skill was obviously a not healthy one. Then there was a part of me that's like, and I know I'm going to hell because I'm doing something that's wrong.
So then you're in that constant shame and guilt spiral.
Right. Remember I said I was going to circle back to my grandma.
Yeah.
Now, my parents never said that. My parents were always loving and forgiving. There were consequences to my behavior.
Right.
But whatever. And then I changed my life and graduated, got married. Everything kind of spiraled within like 3 years, and made a bad decision. Literally had 2 or 3 drinks and got arrested for a DUI less than a mile from my house. And I was a teacher. So then you've got all this like,
yeah,
well, that teacher's horrible and going to hell. And I was back in church, whatever that meant at the time. I had accepted Jesus, but I didn't know how to live because nobody ever told me like how to live a new life. I knew I had a new life, but how do you actually live?
right.
And now you have the baggage of like DUI and whatever. And again, like my parents didn't bail me out. I literally wrote my own check, but they did come and get me.
Yeah.
And they forgave me. What I found out probably 5 or 6 years later was that they made sure that my grandma, remember my grandma, never found out about any of these things in my life.
So they hid the authentic Jamelle, no matter how that is, right? For all of us, we all have baggage. We all have the bad, ugly, all the stuff, because we're human and we're trying to figure this stuff out. But they knew that might lead to her not accepting you, maybe.
Right.
That's why.
The shame that my mom was going to feel as a parent, right?
Yeah.
What did you do as a parent?
Shame.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great work out there on shame. Brene Brown is actually, before people knew her for a lot of her other leadership and courage and things like that type of work in her talks, her earliest research in the 90s was around shame. And she has this quote that says, shame will have you believing that parts and all of you are not worthy of acceptance. And that's why I want to ask these questions too, specifically for folks listening, especially if you are a person who's been adopted and you may not even know the dispositions or the history of your actual biological parents. This is why I encourage people to ask questions with compassionate curiosity, because your own parents are going to be going through their own set of stuff too, and have their own reasons for maybe not sharing with their parents or your grandparent. Like there's this push-pull of grace because they're human too. But ultimately, each of us is a human. No matter the lot we are given in this life and gifted, we are responsible ultimately for ourselves. And that is a really tough truth, especially when you've been a teenager like your situation, where you're already starting to ask those existential questions when you're a teenager, like 12, 13, of, well, who am I really? And what am I doing here? What
and thinking
is in the world?
I'm crazy for having thoughts like this. That was why when I was in college, I was like, I'm going to get a minor in psychology to figure out why did I even start having these thoughts?
Wow. See? Yeah.
Now, I never got an answer, and I'm not going to go like spiritual or anything, but I believe that's kind of part of the human condition.
You can go spiritual if you want. I always tell guests you should be completely yourself if you want.
I think that's the human condition that we live in a fallen world, and there is a force out there that wants us to really not like ourselves, and not love ourselves, and hate ourselves, and destroy ourselves.
The yin and yang.
Yeah. And so, that has definitely, all of that has shaped my heart for mental health, my heart for people that can sometimes get left behind, but also I believe, because I was always in leadership roles, I was always looked up to, I was always admired. And I remember, like, people have no idea how hard it is.
Yeah.
And so, and talking, in my work with youth is, I remember, oh my gosh, I lose track of time, but we'll say like 10 years ago, I had a football player who went on to college, but he wrote on a sheet of paper, you have no idea the pressure I feel. Wow. Because if I don't go to college, if I don't excel in football, I've been told that's my only way to play in college. The pressure, pressure, the expectations that we put on people. And so we don't lead authentic lives. And sometimes as leaders, yeah, you're right. We do have to, as leaders, sometimes we really got to put on a show. And I don't mean that in a mean way.
Put on a face. Sometimes you can't bring that baggage in because that's not a problems.
As leaders, we also then have to develop, how are we facing challenges? How are you taking care of yourself?
Yep.
This is what drew me to, I don't even know how I found you and Kara.
I don't remember either. And then I was like, down the street from my sister.
But it is like this, I got to speak at my daughter's baccalaureate service. And she asked me to speak, and which was a huge honor. And that was like the number one thing I wanted to tell the kids, is that accepting who you are, how God created you. Yeah. And you're not just okay, right? I have naturally curly hair. I have no idea what my origins are.
Yep.
My daughter thinks I'm Mediterranean because I tan easily. I don't know.
Do your ancestry today, Jamelle. Do your ancestry.
She really wants me to. And there's a whole other story why I don't want to do that.
I understand. A lot of people feel that way.
I remember being like, and I grew up on a farm. I'm a tomboy. Yeah. All right. So I was called, as you can imagine, names growing up, or people would assume things about me. Right. And I'm 51. And I believe it's taken me 51 years to be like, but this is how God created me. And I'm not, like, he literally created me with curly hair. Like,
you're like, and that I'm fine with me.
Right. Yeah. Kind of crazy and adventurous and outside the box. And what's wrong with that? And so my thing was, and I think this is going to be the next season on my podcast, is about how to live authentically and not just feel okay about yourself, but we are to be celebrated. Yeah. Like, boom, right? Not just look yourself in the mirror and go, oh, I'm okay. No, like, dude, you rock. Yeah. Like, you are awesome. Yeah. Like, I don't care what you're wearing and what you love. And, and that's definitely like what's drawn me, so, I started this consulting, coaching, whatever, LLC, Lead and Impact. And I think that's really the bottom line of it, whether it be dealing with leaders, whether it be dealing with youth, is like that journey of finding who you are. Yeah. And that changes over time. It does. Okay. Depending on your everything.
I have, I'll insert this quote really quick. Dr. Brent Comer, he's an amazing superintendent in the United States here, leads a great district south of Indianapolis. But and he's actually our Featured Voices episode for July. So if you guys want to learn from a K-12 superintendent as well, he'll be featured then. But he always says, this really powerful quote about, what's the opposite of evolution, and it's extinction. And so he always reminds his staff, he works in a rural area, but they've actually been like nationally highlighted, and they've decided to share resources with the other districts in their area. So a lot of these then rural students out living on farms are getting access to these high level, like graphic AI arts programs and all types of new careers that most of our big public systems in the US don't even have access to at their high schools. So a lot of his students now are graduating with associate's degrees and certifications in 3D printing and like all these different things, right? So he has a lot of cool things happening, but when that happens, obviously, and especially if you're in a more remote area that maybe hasn't had as much exposure to what is happening in the world, so to speak, and the progress that's happening, he's doing such a high favor for the, like, not high favor, but he's doing amazing work. But he always reminds people when the changes get hard, or people are kind of digging in their heels and saying, nah, this is dumb, or why do we have to do this, to remind his teachers, if we're not evolving and then accepting that as it happens, then we will become extinct. And I think that that's a really profound message to continue to remind us who have served and are continuing to serve in the K-12 education space. Right. If we are not evolving, that system will become extinct. And it is happening in pockets where people are just taking their kids out of school, starting their own thing, traveling the world, doing remote learning. I mean, and you can do that now.
Right. Well, I even think a human being, like as a human being, we should be evolving. Like we're never done until like that last breath, right?
Yeah,
like
it's a journey.
I'm always learning. I'm always thinking, going back, and sometimes I have to go back to people. Once I know better, you do better, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Knowledge really is power. Remember those silly commercials? Knowledge is power. That is the truth.
Oh, I loved them.
Right. And so, I've had to go back, and once I've learned things, like, well, that wasn't really the right way to do it.
Right. Exactly.
Like evolving in leadership is like, so I don't know. So that's where I am today, I guess, sorts. And I don't know what that means.
Tell us more about Lead and Impact. Let's close out with, what is Jamelle working on right now? And we call this ending segment every time, unapologetically living out my purpose. But this is where you share, what are you working on now? Or what are some of your visions or goals for Lead and Impact your organization? Where can we find you? She is going to be doing some work with Educator Aid Team 2 in the future. But I want to hear specifically about Lead and Impact, your organization, and how you see that serving and all the stuff. So here's where you plug all Jamelle.
So there's a little bit of like adult and youth. Not that it's set up that way, but it's kind of my serving. So within the adult world, I'm preparing for a strategic planning session with a local school district.
Awesome.
And so getting up to date on hold on, let me see what it's called. Graduates Prepared to Succeed, the GPS of the Indiana DOE. Let me smile.
Yeah.
I spent yesterday and today I'll do a little bit more like diving into that, and so how I can help lead the school board and the administration through this and developing a strategic plan. So it's very exciting because I want to put my own spin on it. I know a lot of these people personally, and I want it to be a positive thing. So I'm really, really excited for that. And then, so I'm changing houses because I'm going to be without a mortgage. Yay for that.
That's a huge celebration.
It is, because I don't like being stuck in one place. So what that means is when my dog gets dropped off in Marquette, Northern Michigan, the end of August, I'm going to spend a few extra days up there.
Good.
And then my dogs and myself are going out to New Mexico, back to Las Cruces. and I am putting together a proposal to do youth leadership with their student government association.
Nice.
So, of course, my friends were all, I don't want to say old, but we've been in education for 25 plus years. So all of my friends now are in leadership roles. And so I am going to be doing that through them. I'm very, very excited about that. Awesome. And then I hope to also, a lot of people don't understand. I'm not one that needs to live fancy. So I hope to not be working like every day, because that's just crazy.
Look, I'm gonna insert this.
But for my lifestyle, I can do some prep, and I can do that anywhere, and I can do a lot of consulting and coaching anywhere.
Yep.
But I really want to write a book, and I want it to be, you don't have, like, the theme of it being the authenticity. Like, I always felt like I was a square peg trying to fit in a round hole. Well, you know what? We should all stop trying. We should all stop trying, right? Yeah. So that's what I want my book to focus on.
Okay.
I know I have a couple speaking engagements back here in Indiana in November, and I'm hoping that with this one-day retreat that I wrote into the proposal some follow-up, because I believe there's going to have to be some follow-up.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about where that can lead. And then, with Educator Aid as well, like fitting that in, I want to be able to continue to work with youth in different aspects. Those are all contracts that will involve paychecks at the end, because we need that. I already am working with my church, where I'm putting on a Christian concert the August 9th.
Okay.
Wrote a grant for that through the church. Was it last week? I really lose track of days. I think it was last week. I brought a different Christian band in, and I just did that all on my own, because I love to do that, and why not? Like, why not?
I get a vibe from I get a vibe from you, like you like festivals and concerts.
I do. So, I kind of hope that next January, February, somewhere in there, I'm in Florida, because why would anybody want to be in the frozen tundra of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where my daughter's
there you go. Hey, subscribers and listeners, this is something for you to take away, especially if you're a person still in K-12 education and you do have aspirations of getting into consulting. You listen to what Jamelle is saying, because I think, and this is something I hear actually anytime I've been in Spain, I hear people there say this, and a lot of European countries actually, which is fascinating, right? They normally get a lot more time off than Americans to rest and relax and be with family. There, when you're spending time, your day and a lot of stores and stuff open around 10 a.m.
Right.
You then close everything around 2 or 3 until about 6 or 7. That's when people pick up their kids, they have dinner, like all of those things. Then you maybe work a little bit more. Then you maybe go out and have dinner at 9 or 10. Maybe you go dancing after that. And then you go to bed at 3, 4. So it's a very different structure than maybe, and I'm painting this picture too, because it's something I took away from a friend there. And they were just saying, here, and he moved from the States to go over there. And he said, here, the US, we design our lives around work. Mm-hmm. Our lives here are designed around living, and work just maybe supports some of the living we want to do. And we like it, and we're passionate about what we decide to do for a career, but it's not the thing. And so I'm pointing out what Jamelle highlighted for you all, because she's saying, okay, I would love to be in Florida when it's cold up here in the north part of the country. Well, then that already gives her inroads. If you are a person who's a consultant and coach or speaker, then she knows where she might look for some of her contracts next. So like those are the pieces to take note of, because we don't have to be so bound and driven. Even if we're really passionate about serving in the work we do, we don't have to lose our sense of living because of that. So people want to work with you, do you have
Right.
a website? Do you have,
Sure.
where should they find you and or your podcast? I'm going to link all your stuff too in the show notes, Jamelle, but do you have anything specific, like a specific website or a specific?
So you can find me at jamellegodlewski.com.
Okay.
If you put in leadandimpact.org, that takes you to the same website. They're one and the same, right?
Nice.
So I need to do some more professional stuff on there, especially once I get some things under my belt here. So I'm excited about making those changes. And then my podcast, the first couple years was really based on my personal life. And so we've rebranded it. When I say we, I do have an editor and a producer. And so it is titled Finding Hope, Joy, and Purpose.
Nice.
So that's kind of what I focus on my podcast, go in seasons, and each season kind of has a theme or a topic. And yeah, my goal really is that to my life is I'm not tied down. It's just kind of where I'm at right now in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the ability to be able to go places to lead and impact others in whatever capacity that is. And I love learning. So even like my daughter's going to Northern Michigan University, they have a very large Indigenous population. And part of her program is she's majoring in environmental studies and sustainability.
Nice.
And part of it is learning about how culture affects the environment. And so she's now leaning towards getting a minor in Indigenous studies.
Beautiful.
So yeah, and so I actually do hope to spend some time up there. I love learning. Yeah. So even, if I get called upon or I have the opportunity to speak or coach or consult in different areas, I love doing the research. I love learning about the different, I love diversity. I love diversity. It is celebrated.
Yeah, I love people. So I've been a people watcher since I was a kid. Yeah. Starting with my parents, they're from two different worlds. As many listeners, if you listen to me and or my sister, my mother was Amish and Mennonite background and my father's Puerto Rican, that there's just a lot that you can learn from people's stories. And the world is becoming more and more interconnected where, the stories that we feature here are the norm. And we can learn from other people, even if you live someplace and you're one of our listeners over in the Philippines or in Thailand or in Kenya, all these different places. We love you. We thank you for showing up. We're going to continue expanding and growing together. And as we always say here, let's continue to get compassionately curious together. When we are compassionately curious, number one, about ourselves, we get to show up and do really cool things like our guest Jamelle gets to do. So if you haven't, we will link this in the show notes, but make sure you check out JamelleGodlewski.com, or you can go to leadandimpact.org. That will also take you here. So you can contact her for any speaking, coaching. You can see her blog, her podcast, all the things are there. She has some great pictures there too. So, but this looks great, Jamelle. And I just appreciate you for sharing so vulnerably and being open and willing to be a guest here on a featured episode. So thank you. And listen, subscribers, make sure you share if you found value. You can also respond. Often there's a link for you to submit questions, or maybe you want to request to be a guest and I don't even know who you are yet. So feel free to do that. Jamelle, we thank you again, and let's continue to get compassionately curious together. I'm your host and guide for this podcast, Justine Gonzalez. And until next time, take care.